Bob Lemin for LCTV. Today we're here on the campus of Millersville University at Bridenstine Hall, the center of the art department for Millersville. Here, for decades, Robert Lyons Jr. was a professor and an inspiration to many future artists. I'm happy to be here today with one of Bob's former students, Joyce Heberlein from Lancaster Galleries. Joyce has handled Bob's art and helped manage his career and showcase his work to a wider audience for decades. Joyce, thanks for coming out today. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Kind of a happy but somber occasion. It brings back a lot of memories to someone who was near and dear to the Lancaster art community. Tell us a little bit about your professor and friend, Bob Lyons.
Well, I was not a BFA student, so I was a non-major, but I had Bob for both art history and for drawing class. And one of the things that became very apparent very quickly was that I was not going to be a fine drawer. But one of the things that Bob was so good at doing was taking everybody and pulling the best out of them. If you come over here where these drawings are, you can see in his style he could be very loose. It's such an economy of stroke, but it still represents everything and you can still see what he's doing. With me, I was way overdoing the drawing, way too much detail. So he gave me a task. I had to do a self-portrait and only lift my pencil once on a full sheet of paper. And that became more of a single line drawing, such as that. So it was just amazing the way Bob could work with each student and each way to get it. And when I finished it, he looked at me and he said, now I can pass you. You finally did a drawing. And then, you know, the other part of that was art history. For him, I had art history, and he insisted we go down to Washington, D.C. to see the Phillips collection and the National Gallery. I didn't want to go, you know, not too many sophomores did, but I walked into a room and saw Luncheon on the Boating Party by Renoir. And that was a painting that I just was not interested in seeing, but there's this wonderful little squeeze of orange on the lace of one of the women's collars. And he came up to me afterwards because I sat there for an hour and just looked at this orange and thought, wow. And he came up to me and I could just tell by the look of his eye. He didn't say anything, but he just sort of looked at me like, now you get it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, so it was a bus trip back in the day, last century.
Yeah, way back in the day. But it actually changed the whole way. I looked at color, looked at artwork. I went on to take some more art classes, and then ultimately ended up opening the gallery. And when he approached me a couple years ago, because he was always more worried about his students and what they were doing than he was showing his own work, I was just thrilled to be able to take the work in. So, but color was huge for him. As you can see in this painting, he always talked about this as being one of his favorite paintings because he could break all the rules. Green skin just probably wasn't going to happen. Orange hair, red backgrounds, blue hair, and that was before now when blue hair is not all that common. But I think the color in his paintings and the broad strokes and his absolutely non-inhibition to use paint as just its own surface and put it on. When you think about the time period this was done,
the 60s?
The 60s, right. And how important that would have been if you take yourself and put yourself in that place for contemporaries. But he was always looking at what's going on in the art scene.
I think, I don't know what your take is, but do you think he was inspired by Hans Hofmann, Franz Klein?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt. Yeah. He was inspired by Hofmann, Klein, maybe even Rao, some of those painters. He would travel often to New York to talk about shows. He always had a show he was talking about. And even if he went to his office, where he and a dear colleague of his, Robert Husted, they could be sounding like they were having an argument, and they were just excited about the same thing in paintings.
I do remember his passion about art and his spirit, and that kind of trickled down to the community.
Indeed.
And he gave wonderful lectures at the DeMuth Museum back in the 80s and I think into the 90s that were well attended and just something that just added to the Lancaster cultural landscape.
Well, for sure. And when we had his exhibit in June of 2017, now here's a man who's in his mid-90s, And student after student from decade after decade after decade came in to say hello to him and to talk to them, whether they stayed in the field or they didn't stay in the field. They remembered him and made it a point to come to talk to him. And so many of them he remembered. He remembered the stories.
Wow.
Things he remembered about things I said in class that I didn't remember, but he remembered.
Oh, gee.
So, yeah. So he was a fantastic man.
Great. And what's next?
Well, I think it's just a whole escape. He was really drawn towards people in terms of getting their character. I remember a painting called The Cat Man, and it was just about a man leaning over and petting a cat. So things that were happening every day. Somebody playing the piano may have been inspired by a concert or may have been inspired by one of the practice rooms over at Millersville. Except for, you see this gold leaf that's been put in here? I recently learned that was given to him by his father when he started painting.
Wow.
So as a sort of a treat to be able to experiment and paint with. And you'll see it surfaces in this one. The painting is at the gallery, the tribute, the Golden Houses. And I think it's in one or two other ones over here too. So he must have treasured that gold enough to be able to keep it and spread it out over decades.
Great.
What are some of your favorites in here, Bob?
Well, I think the middle of that wall, the bird, the yellow landscape, the painting off on the left, the sketchbooks are a delight. It's a kind of a visual treat, a survey of decades.
Yeah, it really is. When I walked into his studio, he had this huge metal cabinet, layers deep, rows high, stacked multiple columns of sketchbooks. So it's really a retrospective of the man's entire career. Everywhere he went, he had a sketchbook with him. Well, I recently learned that in this painting, if you look at this lower quadrant, this section I always thought was genius, how he layered through some of the light green and the dark green. Well, I learned that while it was still wet, he leaned over it to reach for something. But when he pulled his hand off, part of that layering of the dark green. So the genius isn't what I thought it was with painting on top of it, but the genius is that he knew, hey, that works, I'll just leave it alone.
A happy accident.
A happy accident. And the sculpture work is something that he's not really known for. I had not seen sculptural work from him until I actually went out to the studio. But there's some delightful things here. He wasn't nearly as prolific with sculpture work as he was with the paintings, but the work in stone, the work in wood, and again, they're mostly figurative. There are some abstracted ones that are larger in scale and would have been difficult to bring in here, but he just had this way of capturing a figure that gave you a sense of what they were feeling every time.
And he worked in many mediums.
Yes, yes he did. And many mediums sometimes on the same painting or paper.
Little Bob Husted influence in this one.
Yeah. The two of them really, during my college years, were inseparable, and yet so different. They were always doing this to each other, bringing each other up, 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 and up, rather than, it wasn't a competitive, it was more of, darn, that's good, I got to get back to work. You know,
And I was intrigued in reading the notes to the show that Bob Lyons, after he retired from Millersville in 1990, he maintained a studio on campus and continued to paint and work daily.
He did, and actually the paintings were still large scale at that point. And it wasn't until he decided to resign his studio space that he started to paint smaller, because he had no studio space in his home.
Wow.
But he was often at his studio at Millersville even after retirement, and still influenced students.
Sure,
They would
people could come back and
sure.
reminisce.
Sure.
Great.
Or students who hadn't had him, but had heard about him.
And wanted to meet him, yeah. Okay.
This is one of the drawings
Hawaii, yeah.
from Hawaii.
Yeah, probably one of the later ones. Yeah, this looks like all trips, the annual four-week trip to Maui. That's nice.
Well, his son surfs, so you know, it was a
Family
tough way to have to
vacation.
go help
Yeah,
somebody work,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he did some commissions too. He did a mural, at least one mural.
Yes.
And
And you know, he really was, when you look back over his acclamations and everything that he did while he was painting, he was doing everything that a painter would do, just not publicly pronounced. He was in several solo shows, but you never really heard about those. It was never come see my show, come look at my work. It was always, what are you doing, where's your work going, and what show are you in now, and helping them find shows, students find shows to be in. And you rarely knew, except for the faculty show, when his work was exhibited. And so he was receiving honors and awards, he just really didn't push them.
yeah,
So.
and then he had the long association with Echo Valley.
Yes.
From about 1966 up until just recently.
Yeah, up until their most recent show, he exhibited a piece which the family and he helped decide what piece was going into that show. He passed before the show opened, so he did not get to see it hung. But, so he was a member at Echo Valley long time. Yeah.
Great. Did the idea for this show come together because of the fact the family knew he was ill and they kind of wanted to put together a visual survey?
For this show?
Right.
No, the family actually put this show together after his passing, and it was really the generosity of Millersville University happened to have just a space, so the timing just, you know, somehow the cosmos and the universe, he's still influencing, but
so
yeah,
he would be pleased. So he didn't even know. He had no.
There was no discussion about this ahead of time. It was just calling Millersville, honestly, for the reception afterwards, and then just, well, what do you think? So most of these pieces are held in the family's collection. I'd like to talk about one more painting, maybe.
Sure.
Schultz Road down here. Schultz Road is out towards the western end of the county, out past Millersville, heading down towards the river. And he returned to this road decade after decade, because if you look at some of the paintings, this is just one of many of the paintings. In fact, many of the paintings are the same size and shape and from the same angle. So you see that road taking that hill as it goes. You can see the influence of the change in growth from painting to painting, where here you're starting to see, there's still landscape back in here, but you're starting to see some of the development going on. But it was one of his favorite places to revisit and go paint. So, and here's another version of it, which, you know, I find them really an amazing composition to be able to make it work, because you've got this vertical line splitting it up this way, and yet it still works. But you can see the road change, so you know the history of the road through his paintings, which I don't know if, as a painter, you can ask for much more than that to represent what was going on. He was very concerned in certain society rows. I know this particular painting, actually, to be in this exhibition.
The Prisoner.
But what happened was, about a week after he had passed, before all this started to get pulled together, his son Dean happened to be in the gallery. We were talking, and Richard Russell stopped in and said, "Oh, you know, I remember your dad so well." And Dick remembered this painting.
Wow.
And that's from how long ago? And Dick remembered this painting specifically because of the intensity of this. This was a prisoner and being led out of the courthouse. We don't yet.
The Lancaster courthouse.
And so something triggered involved that there was something about the sort of agony in this man's face and his posture that made Bob paint it. We don't know if he was on site. We don't know if he picked it up out of seeing it on television. And we have not yet been able to rediscover which particular event it was, but it had to have some magnitude of impact on Bob.
So you think circa 68 to 72?
Yeah, I would think somewhere in the early 70s, based on when Dick was in
school. Right. Great. Let's wrap up with the an early self-portrait down at the end.
Down at the end, yeah. I mean, it is a younger Bob, for sure, for those of us who know him as he progressed through. But, you know, once again, the power of his figures just will always stay with me. He's got color going on up here that you would never see in reality. But then again, I think artists have a tendency to see a little different, and what I always admire from Bob is what he was trying to teach me how to see through the eyes of him,
right,
or through the eyes of an artist. So if you look long enough, you'll see those colors.
Oh yeah.
In people.
Yeah. Yeah, he had a lot of passion for paint, a lot of passion for Lancaster.
Yes. Never left Lancaster, never left Millersville after he got here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It all came together.
Yep.
He was a Pennsylvania native, I believe,
yes.
Uniontown.
I think Western Pennsylvania he was, and those paintings are haunting. They're very much, because Uniontown, I think, had a lot of mining, I think, or industry of some sort that was starting to show its age and become defunct. So those paintings are kind of haunting in terms of, they're beautiful paintings, but it's clear that there's a sense of, you know, prosperity there.
Right.
But yeah, the house that he lived in through to his death was the same house he moved into when he moved to Millersville to teach. Yeah.
Great.
Or close enough there by years there. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thanks, Joyce.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Millersville University. For LCTV, I'm Bob Lemin.